Mr. Narkunis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here now as we have come to that conclusion of the case. The judge said to you, each side gets to argue the evidence and tell me why their position is the correct position for you to present when you return a verdict in this particular case. You've heard from Attorney Scully, you've seen Ms. Morrissey. In this particular case, we represent Judy Church in these proceedings. Two issues, two words that we began the case with, and I think are important throughout. We talked about color and we talked about taste. We had some presentations relative to that, and I'll get to those in a moment with you. He, Leroy, did what he wanted, and you don't tell him what to do. You just don't. This was Judy Church in a statement to the police when she was talking to Trooper Williams and she was talking to Detective Verney on November 14, 2020. Judy Church did not kill Leroy Fowler. Judy Church did not murder Leroy Fowler. Now, the court has set out for you the law that it gets applied in this particular case. I would just like to highlight as I'm beginning again what some of that is. The very foundation of our system of justice in which we operate. It's the bedrock of which our entire system is built. There's reasonable doubt. This isn't just a technicality, and it's not just a slogan. It's a constitutional shield that protects the innocent and prevents the government from punishing without proof. The Commonwealth has the high burden to prove each and every element of the charged crime, in this particular case, murder, beyond a reasonable doubt, that is to a moral certainty. Those are powerful words. They're not just legal jargon. They are your mandate. They are your obligation. They're your community's protection against injustice in our system. Now, what that means is that at the end of the case, where we are, at the end of this trial, when you have the charge by the court and you are deliberating, if you think, you know what, maybe that's true, it might be true, then you have to vote not guilty. If you think it's possibly true, or probably true, your vote must be not guilty. If someone among you thinks it's likely true, even if very likely true, your vote still must be not guilty, because none of those standards, none of them, might be, could be, possibly, very likely, none of those meets the extraordinary burden of what beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty means within our criminal justice system. Now, this case revolves around the relationship of the church and the Leroy Fowler. And the Judy Church, a mother, a sister, a homemaker, an educator. She laid those all out for the police when she gave her second statement on November 14th. She told Trooper Williams about her long career as a fourth grade teacher in Middleton, Massachusetts. She was married when she first encountered Leroy Fowler. He came and he rented a room or unit from her at their home in Salisbury. Soon, they became a couple. They were in love. Husband left. Husband, I believe the name you've heard was Rusty. He left. And at that point in time, then, I might show you this. These have been introduced as exhibits in this particular case. The next one, please. In 2012, then, Judy and Leroy set up a home, and they started to create a life together. Judy had financial security. She had the house. She had the full-time job. She was healthy, vibrant, and smart. Then they cruise along in that same mode. And then in 2016, 2017, someplace in that time frame, Leroy began a second relationship with a woman named Barbara Randall. Also about that time, and you have the medical records of Leroy here, he started having a number of medical issues. You have his medical records from 2016 to 2022. The health continued to spiral downwards up and through November 14th, 2022. And again, you'll have those available to you. You can see what they set out for you. Physically, at times he had chronic pain syndrome. He had a pacemaker. He had Achilles problems. He had stomach issues. Mentally, he had depression. The records show he had bipolar disorder and anxiety. And at that point in time, the evidence is being presented to you. He was not working. He was on perhaps Social Security disability, but he had no financial independence. And what also is indicated in there, he was polysubstance abuse issues. He was using cocaine. And an emerging issue, perhaps, with alcohol from some of the evidence that you've heard. At one point in time, Leroy had a temper, and at one point in time, he got into a physical altercation with Barbara Randall, and that was in the summer of 2022. Pulled her hair, threw her to the ground. Things were not getting better for Leroy at that time. He had some blackouts that had been reported, and and his position seemed to be getting physically worse. Over the years, as the couple progressed, Judy had bought 2 motorcycles for Leroy and a pickup truck. He did become dependent upon her as his principal source of income. But the actions of Leroy Fowler were somewhat consistent. You had heard from Michael Hawkins. Michael Hawkins told you that his mother was named Julie Hawkins, and Leroy had been living with them. Then at some point in time, when he had met Judy, Leroy moved out on Julie Hawkins and moved in with Judy Church. And then he would be, according to Michael Hawkins, come back for visits was the term that he had used. I would submit to you there would seem to be a particular pattern of the way Leroy Fowler was leading his life in terms of associations with women. And then he takes on a life of his own. His agenda was the agenda that he made as once he became, this 2017, I believe the evidence was from Barbara Randall, that he began an association with her. And it was an association where he went over a house, stayed there. You can believe they were living as a couple. It's reasonable to infer from what you have heard. At the same time, he's still living with Judy Church. And at that point in time, and I think there was some indications from some of the evidence, obviously Judy Church was hurt. I'm assuming at some point in time, Barbara Randall was hurt. He's splitting his time between both. He's abusive, therefore, emotionally to both women at the same time. There is no particular, they show flashes of anger but they blame each other. Neither one of them is blaming. Text messages you have available to you is blaming the Leroy. They had even came out with nicknames for each other, and you heard those from the testimony here. I won't repeat those here today, but it denigrated to that situation. Again, the person that was causing all of this, they didn't share their anger at, they did it towards each other at that point in time. Judy would channel her anger at times, and you have a couple of the journals, they're undated, but she would journal her anger about what Leroy was doing, a way to get rid of your hostility without taking out any action against the person. She would put down what she saw and what was there. But Judy constantly expressed her love for Leroy, despite what was happening to her, and it does get angry at times. Tammy Carbone, Leroy's sister, testified she became friends with both women during this period of time. She testified Leroy did not have the means to pay for his own life, and he had his health problems. As previously mentioned, Leroy III, the son, was out trying to give some work to his father. I think he said he gave one construction job to him. The important aspect of that is he still could go out and do work. You heard about, through the statements of Judy Church, which we'll get to in a moment, to the police, that Leroy was doing work around their homes, that he was building, trying to build a floor underneath. He still had his, he was still active physically. Michael Hawkins took him to work on a grow facility for 3 days up in Vermont. And he was active as physically there as well. Get up there. He indicated that at some point in time, Leroy III, that he even had a restraining order against his father in 20 and 21 due to physical issues that he had encountered with his dad. Leroy III, the son, also had a relationship with both Judy and Barbara Randall. There's crossing roads at all times. The years move on for the triangle that is composed of Judy Church and Leroy Fowler and Barbara Randall. Nothing of any hostility between the women themselves, physical hostility. There are down times, there are messages expressing feelings, there are partial breakups, but Judy continues to express her love for Leroy. She gets very hurt, she indicates, when at one point in time, when she sees Barbara sitting on the back of a motorcycle that she bought for Leroy. And at that point in time, she went out and bought him another motorcycle instead. Now, when you move into January of 2022, the couple, Leroy and Judy Church, go down to Florida. They buy a home. There's a deed here showing that they actually bought the home in Florida, and it's under both of them. It's under both their names, tenancy by the entirety, which is normal when there's a couple together within it. And Judy is pushing Leroy to join her and come, and they're going to move to Florida. It gets delayed, and finally in mid-November, they're packing up, they're going. You saw the house, pictures of the house. Everything seemed to be in disarray as they were packing up and getting ready to leave in the house. They had bought a van. William Eaton talked to you about a second van they were looking at to get so they could move to Florida. In that mid-November time frame is when all of the dreams of Judy Church are coming true. Barbara's going to be behind. Leroy Fowler is coming with her. They've got a residence, a home in both of their names in Florida, and they're moving there. There are text messages of evidence showing that Leroy and Barbara had ended it, the hostility between them, the words that were done. I believe they were from November 5th or 6th, but you'll have those with you in the jury room to look at within this. That Judy, when she's talking to the police, says that she believes when they're down there, Leroy can be drug-free because she believes, but that she has no basis for it necessarily, but she believes that Barbara Randall was the source of Percocets for Leroy. And now in Florida, the drug issue would be left behind, and they will be all set. Now, Leroy had particular drinks. Everybody said he had a sweet taste in what he liked to drink. He liked to drink Fanta, orange soda, and they like to drink fruit punch, red, Powerade, and coffee fraps or milkshakes made for him by Judy in her blender. At some point prior to 2022, it became a family joke that originally started perhaps by Leroy, that in giving the milkshakes to Leroy, she was trying to poison him. Now, if you jump forward to the police search, they take the blender out of the house. They don't do any testing on that. But that was the position that the family had, that he was getting poisoned through family milkshakes made in the blender of her home. They seize the blender, but they don't touch it. They don't test it to see if there's anything there. Now, in the weeks leading up to November 11th, family and friends speak and see Leroy and express opinions about how he feels and what he looks like. Now, Michael Eaton said he talks with him about the van, sees him about a week prior regarding the sale of the van. He said he looked fine, sounded fine, and seemed to be happy about and speaking about moving to Florida. Now, the day that the government says that Judy Church stepped forward to murder Leroy Fowler Sr., she did so by putting ethylene glycol in a Powerade bottle. All of the evidence of that time shows that, again, the dreams of Judy Church have come true, that everything is working well at that point in time. The government has no evidence in this particular case, direct or even circumstantial, that things were a rise on November 10th, November 9th, November 11th, and yet they want you to believe that she purposely and deliberately set out to murder him. Not harm him, but murder him at that particular date. The circumstantial evidence supporting that is so minimal, ladies and gentlemen, in this particular case. Now, Leroy is up most of that night, according to what Judy says, and we'll get to her statements to the police in a moment. And he has a consistent message, and he is, and I'll go over this probably several times, he's doing text messaging. So absolutely sure, going in text messaging. They are somewhat, pornographic going forward, but there's a consistent message from 1 a.m. through 5:30 a.m. So the thought process is working here, and then he's doing it on a cell phone. Everybody has done that. And what is your keyboard on a cell phone? 1 inch high by 2 inches wide. And for most men, larger hands, larger fingers, you've got to know what you're doing, and the message goes through. It's possible some of those, there's some misspellings or misstatements on it, but it shows a consistency of mental alertness, physical dexterity in this particular case. Why is that important? Because you've heard a lot of evidence in this case about what ethylene glycol does. Ethylene glycol has a timeline. Even with Mr. Crouch here today, statements from and questions from Mr. Bilio, it's a timeline. There were 3 stages they talked about. The doctor from Mount Auburn also told you about the half-life of ethylene glycol and what happens when that is consumed. And jumping ahead into Mr. Crouch's statements to begin with, he talked about the quantity that would be necessary for a person to consume to be able to have, considering those other factors, ethylene glycol. You've heard words metabolizes, become acids, anion gaps, and as molar, whatever. The ethylene glycol disappears, and that's the toxic substance come in, but it moves quickly through the system. He had 28 grams in his system still at the time he went to Anna Jake's hospital in Newburyport. That again, I would submit to you when you analyze the timeline. It's consistent with someone that's doing it themselves in the evening. He would have to have consumed to get to that, somewhere around 2 or maybe a little more 20-ounce Powerade bottles itself. Whatever may have been in them and however it got into them. Now, at some point in time then, Anna Jakes decides that they can't treat Mr. Fowler as he's there. When you first look at what happens, you had the videotape of the officer that responds, Delaria, and the EMTs and the fire department that gets there. And what do? They come in, and it's clear and obvious that they believe he's ODing. They're in no hurry. They're talking to him. They're doing something. The officer took the stand to counter Mr. Lemke, one of the EMTs, who had said that Leroy said to him something in the neighborhood of either I took 2 perk 10s or I took 10 perks. But he made a statement to him. The officer's presentation is, well, I didn't hear it. When you look at it, what you're going to see is, as where I am here, he's outside the door. The 2 EMTs are inside. Judy's in the bed talking. They're bending down to hear the man. This officer said, well, I didn't hear it. Because you didn't hear it, it didn't happen. Mr. Lemke was certain it happened. He said it. And I believe he told you that he repeated it inside the ambulance itself. What's important about that is, he didn't say, it's what she made me drink. I was poisoned. It's what it was the liquid that I drank. It was the milkshake. None of that came in at that point in time. A critical stage of his life at that point, and he's not saying anything other than he believed it was something that he took on his own. And I think that is absolutely critical. What happens after that is it seems to take on a life of its own, the investigation, not driven by investigators, but put together as the family believes that something happened because Leroy said over the years, I think Judy's poisoning me. Part of it also is you've heard about the timeline, and you've heard about what happens if you get to someone within who has ethylene glycol poisoning, and you get to them within a reasoned period of time. Maybe they're going to be pretty good. He sits in Anna Jake's 12 hours, I think it was what the nurse said. And then at some point in time, he gets moved to Mount Auburn. Mount Auburn decides they cannot do it. They do a dialysis, but they can't really help him anymore. And then they send him over to Beth Israel. Now, if I can sneak by here for a moment. Within the records you're going to see of Beth Israel Hospital itself, and you'll have those with you and be able to read them. There is the statement that I had the ME read to you, in which the doctors treating him, the team treating him, said this is an unusual case. There is an issue relative to whether he actually has ethylene glycol poisoning or what is causing his death. He ultimately dies of a stroke in this particular case. The family now gets together, the family, and what you have within that is you have Tammy Carbone, you have Leroy III, and you have Michael Hawkins all together and go to Mr. Eaton's house, and they call the police to come there. How unusual is that? The police are going to go talk to the family all collectively together at the house. As a result of that, the family tells them about the joke. She's been poisoning me. They figure, that's it. We know what we've got. Let's go. Off they go to speak to Judy Church herself. That's the interview that takes place on her own property. She meets with them. You have the video. You're able to see that. She's not expecting the police. She comes home with a pizza. She's genuinely concerned and afraid when they tell her, why are you here? And she believes they're going to tell her that Leroy has died. And she's upset relative to that. And they say they're there to investigate what has happened to them. I believe it's Trooper Williams who tries to assuage her emotional state and say what we're trying to do is just find out how this came about, what happened relative to this. She tears up several times in talking about him, walks the police around, takes them to where he had been working again, she said, that week, and what he had been doing. I think she said he was trying to replace a floor at that point in time, in the house, in the cottage that was behind the house that they had. Now, there's a second interview done with Judy. And when that second interview is being conducted, they are also at that point in time conducting a search of Judy Church's home. And as Attorney Scully pointed out so ably to you, the search seemed to be cursory. How many items weren't even looked at? How many items weren't even examined within the context of that house itself? And the essence, I think, of that is that at some point in time, after the interview with Judy Church, the Trooper Williams goes back to the house, goes into the room occupied by Mr. Fowler, looks around, and there are several containers of Fanta soda, which was his second issue that they had, and he takes one, arbitrarily looks at it and says, I'll take that one. And even he couldn't explain why he did that. He just thought he should take one out of it. The room where he had been the night before, and he had spent considerable time, and he had been doing his texting. And then that goes off to the lab. Ultimately, both matters go off to the lab at some point in time in December out at NMS. And you heard the gentleman from NMS come in and testify. And they found ethylene glycol in the solution sent from the Powerade bottle. And again, this was a fruit punch, a red fruit punch bottle. And yet what they find, and they find it in the recycling bin, is a fruit punch bottle that's orange in color, and that's the reason it gets their attention. It's orange in color, and they assume, and obviously it's not fruit punch. And again, as we had said to you before, and we have repeated throughout, color and taste are two huge criteria for anybody. Anything you pick up, you get a glass of milk, and all of a sudden you take a light sip, and it's sour. I'm not drinking that. I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. You look at something, it's the wrong color. You've ordered a root beer. It comes and it's orange. What are you going to say? That's not my drink. You can't do that. If you are consistently over the years drinking a red drink, you're going to look for it to be red. If it's a different color, I would submit the average person isn't going to consume it. You don't know what that is. And in relation to, did that particular item taste bitter to Leroy Fowler? Now again, the government chooses not to test for Beatrix. The NMS gentleman said, well, we don't do that because we don't advise it to be done. Apparently it's a test, I don't know, costly or whatever. We had it done on behalf of Judy Church. We found a lab that would do that, and they did it. NMS certainly could have had the same capabilities or have done that. It certainly leads an investigation into why would this happen? Why would someone with that? A number of the witnesses at the request of Mr. Camilio said, well, statistics show people are still doing it. If people are self-bent on hurting themselves, yes, they could still do that. But it's put in there, and Massachusetts has a statute on it. It's put in there for a particular purpose, if nothing else, to alert you for what you're consuming. So the color and the taste are wrong in the bottles that they find where the ethylene glycol is there. Interestingly enough, the other bottles they pull out of Powerade, they don't do any testing on. Why? We don't really know at that point in time. Now, while all of that is happening, Judy goes in and gives a statement to the police. Leroy had passed away. She had done that. She comes to the station voluntarily. She's not under arrest. She's not being forced to go there. She waves, and you've heard that. You hear her voice, you hear her tone, you see her body movements. All of those things everybody takes into account when you're seeing if somebody is truthful or not truthful. What are you doing? How are you doing it? Where are you looking? And so you can see all of that. She provides her phone password to them so they can get into it. As we all know, Apple doesn't let you get into the phone no matter what happens unless you have a password. Now, she provides her email address so that can be searched. When she's asked whether they will find anything about antifreeze on her phones, she says no. And they don't. Or it would have been an exhibit, certainly, in this particular case, if that had come forward. Among other things she says Leroy was her world. They lie and suggest her fingerprints will be on an antifreeze bottle. They found at her home. They try and trick her, persuade her. What is she going to say? For an hour and a half, she's there and talking. They didn't find any antifreeze at the house. They never found antifreeze at the house. So I'll get to discuss with you in a minute. They never found a source for it, for whatever the ethylene glycol was that's in that Powerade bottle. But they're trying to trick her, but she's being truthful. And she confidently says her prints won't be found on it. They don't have it, and they don't. And interestingly enough, of the Powerade bottle that's here in this particular case, we've heard much about DNA and what's found on DNA on that, which I'll get to in a moment. There's no fingerprints of Judy on that. It's in the recycling bin. You would expect it probably would have been. But nothing. They don't find that on there. Now, they ask her why the Fowler family is blaming her. They put direct questions from her that you, as jurors, trying to determine what may happen in a case, would have probably wanted to have placed before him. She explains that they've all taken the old joke, as I've told you, and they've run away with it. She tells the police that they're all putting the blame on her, but it isn't her. She repeatedly says, I did not kill that man. I love that man. Now, you can ask yourself, if Judy did poison Leroy, then why would she joke about it with Tammy while he was in the hospital? I remember there was LOL, laugh out loud. I'm going to bring him a poison milkshake. And Tammy says, maybe I'll bring him one too on that. And remember, she's a very smart lady. They bluff, the police bluff, and they try and, what if we test the Ninja machine, the blender? She says, go ahead. They do take it. It's in the photos you saw of what was taken by the search. And they never test it. So they're challenging her left and right, and she is 100% successful. After an hour and a half of intense grilling by 2 officers, she has stayed with her description of what took place and why it took place. Now, in the DNA itself, as to the significance of that in this particular case, you've heard about transfer, secondary transfer. I've touched that rail several times throughout this trial. My DNA could go home with some of you who've reached over and touched that yourselves on it. The issue about a cap, you know, I just put my cap here. Wasn't that going to pick up DNA? The issue is, why would it be on the lip? Now I'm going to put the cap back in the bottle, as most people do. If you haven't finished it in one, you always put the cap back on. Take it off again. I put it on something else. I put it back on. Transfer. Whatever DNA was there is now on the lip of that bottle. That's not any type of miracle. It's her house. Her DNA is everywhere. How many years have they lived there? It's everywhere. Leroy's there too. Now, was Leroy's not on the lip of the bottle? So the only person that was drinking ethylene glycol was Judy? No, that was a transfer issue. The other aspect you can see many times, people will take a slug of the water. You might do this. You might touch someone after that. I've done this. You've got my DNA. There's no way that that DNA has any evidence of any merit whatsoever in this particular case. I think, and I would submit to you, again, the issue within the context of this case, it's circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence, I would submit to you, is never going to show you proof beyond a reasonable doubt on the most serious charge we have in our judicial system. There is nothing here that would put that together. Well, the first thing you would need is, if the government is correct, you'd need a motive. Why am I going to kill you, would say Judy. Why is Judy Church on November 11th, 2022, want to murder? Not harm, not kick, not incapacitate, murder Leroy Fowler. Well, wait, Barbara's going to be left behind. That could be a reason. Maybe he was going with Barbara. No, wait, there's no evidence of that. It's just the opposite. He's told Barbara goodbye. Well, maybe he's going to move out with someone else. No, they're going to Florida. They put a house in his name in Florida. So he's got some financial gain to go and make and do, and her life is going to be successful. There's just no motivating factor here. Everything has come together finally for what should take place. Judy Church was angry at Leroy. Move out. It's my house. I get a restraining order and you're gone. How about 2019? He's been with Barbara for a year. Would you be angry and now want to kill her? How about the statement of John Haywood to show you the reach of the government and the reach of the family? 2 years later, on this issue, he comes forward. So I was in a bar, talked to him for 4 minutes, and Judy said, if he ever cheats on me, this is 2020. If he ever cheats on me, I'll poison him. Let's see. He was cheating on her all of 2018, all of 2019. When was that in 2020? How does that statement make any sense? And he tells it 2 years later, and he's related to the family. That's the overreach that the government has in this case for you, the significant overreach. So motive, we don't know. Now, how about ethylene glycol? Had anybody ever heard of ethylene glycol if you weren't working in the automotive industry beforehand? Trooper Williams, what did he have to do to learn about ethylene glycol? He went on Wikipedia. Isn't that how he thought he could charge her? Because he's found out ethylene glycol is this on Wikipedia. But I think of more interest is the medical examiner. He's a doctor. He's coming up with causes of death. He's never had one before. What did he do? He said he went onto the computer and looked up Wikipedia. What do they find on Judy's phone? What searches? Where was she finding out? How am I going to kill him? Was she looking for cyanide? Was she looking for other substances? And it finally came up with ethylene glycol? No, nothing. So if these very learned people, one in the law enforcement, one partially, ME, and then even the NMS scientist said to you, he's only had one case ever, 2000. He had to look up some stuff online. So how's Judy finding out? One, do you get on to CVS and they got a special going? Over here this week, there's ethylene glycol. Maybe it's Market Basket. Where do you get it? Do you get it pure or do you get it with Beatrix in it? How would you get Beatrix to put it in if you didn't do that? I mean, there's somewhat of an absurdity in terms of the overreach. They have never, ever been able to tell you a source that they say of the ethylene glycol. And you wonder, why do I have that up here? And that's introduced as evidence. and there's multiple pictures of another bottle of it. Because this is what they originally thought it was. This has no merit as evidence whatsoever in this case, except it was found in the kitchen of the house. None. It's not this. That's the type of distraction that's ongoing here. You're probably looking at this since I started giving this speech. What is he going to do with that? Why is that there? Because it has no value whatsoever. But it's to try and convince you that someplace in that house, she must have had something like this. We just never found it. But it's not there. So we don't have a motive. We don't have any planning. We don't have any ability to pick up whatever it is that's supposed to be there on the most serious charge of our judicial system as to why this lady would have done that. Now, just a circumstantial case is not, in terms of what is here, is not the proof beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty equating to one of the most important decisions you would make in your life. Again, if Judy didn't want Leroy, get out, leave 2019, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, early part of 2022, and wait till everything is perfect, and now I'm going to go out and do something that most people don't know anything about and find out how to effectuate this. Now, one thing that I think has to be considered is the videos. There's 13 of those small videos, a minute apiece, that was taken on the early morning hours of that. The government wants you to view them as Judy somehow enjoying the suffering of Leroy. She told the police this was something he had done before when he OD'd on drugs. It's something that's not uncommon for people to do when there's people having some sort of problems with a family member, and you want to show them what their conduct does. So she takes them and she keeps asking him, that 29 minutes, what happened? What did you take? Do you want me to call an ambulance? Finally, when he says yes, and when the police talked to her about was there any delay in the ambulance, she said he didn't want to go to Anna Jake's. He didn't want to have the hospital an ambulance take him. But so she waited until he said that. And if it was in fact, as everybody at that moment thought, the type of tape you could use, you get to Florida, and you say, let's not ever have this happen again. Let's not get involved in any type of drug issue. There's no enjoying what your discomfort is in this particular case. Ultimately, he doesn't have any physical issues. He's not cutting himself. He's not bleeding. He's not getting bruising. I think two different doctors told you that in this particular situation. So there was a purpose. There was a method. Because again, they're going, they're leaving. And then when he gets to the hospital, she's there. She's the person that goes. And again, relative to the dissatisfaction of the family, they're really, really upset that she didn't bring them and notify them before they have their meeting at the house. Now, again, your mission is not to try and figure out what happened to Leroy. It's not why we're here. You have only one function, and that is to determine whether the prosecution has proven its case against Judy Church beyond a reasonable doubt as to each and every element. Again, it's not a maybe, it's not a probability, it's not a possibility, it's to a moral certainty. And remember, this case is loaded with reasonable doubt. Pieces of the puzzle. Mr. Scully, Attorney Scully, told you about that when we began. It's like a puzzle. And the government is trying to fit all the pieces in, but they're trying to put some square pieces into round holes, and they don't fit in what we have here. Now, it's impossible to think that Leroy Fowler wouldn't have noticed the color. It's bright orange on those as I've displayed those to you. It's impossible to think that he was drinking was not his usual red fruit punch. It's impossible to ignore the bittering agent we would submit to you that's in there. When asked why the prosecution didn't test for it, Sergeant Williams didn't have a good explanation, really. He relied on a Google search about it. They did test for fingerprints, none found. They did test for DNA. We've gone over that relative to this. They generated 5 profiles. What does that really mean? The search of Judy's house was totally unorganized and centered only on one thing. She did it. We don't really have to look for anything else. Let's go. And again, watching what took place with Trooper Williams when he comes back and he goes into the back bedroom, because Judy told him that Leroy was beforehand. He looks around, sees a couple of Fanta cans, and decides, I'll take that one. That shows you exactly the effort that was being taken in this particular case. Each of these helps you determine that there is reasonable doubt in there. We saw photographs that were never collected or tested. Multiple Powerade bottles. How about we test more of those? Multiple orange Fanta cans. How about the can that went out to the NMS? Well, there was some sort of interference because there was some other substance. This is a chemical lab testing. There was some other chemical in there. We didn't know what it is. Well, you're a chemical lab. Why don't you test for that? Tell us what it is. Is that ethylene glycol? Is that cocaine? Is that something? What is that? Give us something. Nope. We decided not to finish the test, and the government said that we're not going to redo that test. Those are the items in the back bedroom. Is that where more of the 28 grams were coming from? What was in his bedroom at that point in time? We don't know. When she goes to the hospital, Judy's holding his hand. She brings him presents. She tries to stage a birthday party from him when he's in there. If Judy put antifreeze in the Powerade, why would you leave that in your house? She's a smart lady. You could tell by the interview with the police. So it's going to happen, and I'm just going to throw it into the trash. I'm just going to put it, not only in the trash, I'm going to put it into recycling. There's no, in that context, ladies and gentlemen, again, it shows you the reasonable doubt, the circumstantial evidence that is an overreach in this case. Again, the Rain Act turned out not even to be linked in this case. They found nothing incriminating in Judy's diaries or notebooks. How about the puppet about Barbara? How many people have done something like that over the years, right? What does that signify? And did we even have a year for that? Was that 2018? And that meant in 2022, 4 years later, she would want to murder Leroy? And the text message about being a Scorpio and knowing what to sting. It doesn't mention Leroy and has nothing to do with him. It seemed to be more directed towards Barbara. They didn't find what they were looking for, so they cut and paste together all these scraps of text messages, photographs, journal entries. It says, here, we think we've got it all together now. If she had something incriminating on her phone, why wouldn't she hide it? Wipe the phone. What did Tom Brady do? He took out the chip and he broke it. Why? How much do you have to know to be able to do something to hide it from on your phone? And again, Mr. Lemke, what he told you happened with him. Trooper Williams, young, smart, but eager to solve the case very quickly, very energetically, and without a lot of effort, right? We got it right here. But the investigation lacks merit in this particular case. Judy and Leroy's text messages, they're all positive in November of 2022. That's when this is happening, 2022. This is not something in September he decides he's going to murder him, but you know, I think I'll wait 2 months. The weather might be better in November to commit a murder than it might be in September. The text messages that are current showing the mental state and alert. Leroy's texting, again, I've told you that. What is there? Again, the video's somewhat difficult to watch, but she has seen him like this before, and she wanted to show him to Leroy, a big incentive to change. She doesn't delete them. Why wouldn't you delete them if you thought there was something wrong and you had murdered him? Why would you not do that? That would have to be really something that would be on the pale, as it would go, right?
Mr. Norkonis, you're out just about 50 minutes.
Thank you, Judge. This is a circumstantial case, ladies and gentlemen. When we began, our court administrator told you that Judy Church had placed herself before her country, which country you are, and you represent the best in our judicial system. I submit to you that the only true and just verdict in this case is that of not guilty of the charge here facing Judy Church. I want to thank you on behalf of Ms. Church, Attorney Scully, and Ms. Morrissey for your time, patience, and effort in this case, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Your Honor.